Hello and welcome to the Hole in My Heart podcast. This is episode 241, Ministering to Families in Crisis.
Yes, welcome to the Hole in My Heart podcast, where we talk about how the gospel is good news for everyone, every day. I'm your host, Laurie Krieg, and alongside me is my husband and favorite licensed therapist, Matt Krieg. Hey, Matt.
Hi.
How are you?
Doing all right.
Yeah, glad you're here.
Yeah, good to be here.
On my other side, we have Steve Odell, who is our friend and the most professional radio voice among us. Producer
Hi, guys.
Steve.
Hi.
How are you?
Hello. I interrupted you.
That's fine.
Please say my name again. I'm just kidding.
I need to hear the producer
Producer Steve.
Right.
over and over. Are you actually, is that part of your job title? Are you actually a producer, or I just call you that?
I don't know. I do production,
So then you are.
so that happens. But really, Zach is doing the lion's share of the producing of this.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah.
All right. Well, today we're going to talk about families in crisis who are in the church. I have had this question in my head, and Matt has too, for so many years. Actually, I don't know if Matt has, but I'm going to speak for him. But the question is, what is the relationship between churches and families who go to pastors and are like, oh, my word, our hair's on fire, everything stinks, this is hard, please help us, help us, help us. And places like Matt, who is a clinical therapist, or other ministries, parachurch ministries. What's the relationship? Should pastors automatically outsource to these places? Do they have to take the families on themselves and they have to try and figure it out on their own? We're going to ask a professional, a psychologist, to help us. And who is that professional, Steve?
That is Jennifer S. Ripley, PhD. She's a professor and the Rosemary Scotty Hughes Professor of Integration at Regent University School of Psychology and Counseling, and co-director of the Charis Institute. She's licensed as a psychologist and publishes In Psychology of Religion and Family.
Well, with that, let's welcome Jennifer to the show officially. Jen, welcome.
It's so glad to meet you. Thank you so much for having me.
We're so glad that you're here.
Yeah, and we want to get to know Jennifer better by asking the question of the week from last time, which is, Jennifer, what was your favorite children's book growing up?
Yeah, so I distinctly remember being in the 4th grade, and it was late at night, and I am pulling out Madeleine L. Engle's A Ring of Endless Light and reading it for probably the 8th time, because I loved that she could talk to dolphins and that they were doing research. So there was science involved, and it was all very magical and beautiful. I really loved Madeleine L. Engle's work when I was a kid.
Oh, I love that.
So awesome.
Matt, which listener response did you like?
Yeah, I really liked what Simon said on Facebook. He said, winkin', blinkin', and nod. I love this book so much that my parents knew all the words. And knew all the words and read it to me while I looked at the pictures. And that one just stood out to me because I know that game with the kids memorizing certain parts of books, you know, Dr. Seuss, One Fish, Two Fish, Red Fish, Blue Fish. I won't go through the whole book right now.
You know them all. I'll mess up the words and he'll yell them in another room. He's like, no, that's not right. It's this. And I'm like, it's fine. But he and the kids, they're right. Steve, what about you?
I appreciated what Shannon said on Facebook. Charlotte's Web.
Aww.
Empathetic. Little me read the last bit of the book over and over and over during 3rd grade silent reading after lunch recess. I was so brokenhearted for Wilbur and Charlotte's newborn children. Big sigh.
Oh,
Yeah.
3rd grade. I feel like that's like primary children's reading core memories.
I don't
It's
know
for me.
what's wrong with me or the school I went to or maybe my parents. I don't know. But
What?
it was a long time before I realized that the animated TV special I watched every year had been a book.
Which book? What series?
Charlotte's Web.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I remember the cartoon.
Yeah.
I don't remember ever reading the book.
I liked this from Brianna on Facebook too. Harold and the Purple Crayon or the Velveteen Rabbit. I have at least 6 versions of the Velveteen Rabbit now. She said, if you guys want to answer the question of the week too, you can go to the Hole in My Heart podcast Facebook page. You can just search for it, answer a couple questions. I'll let you in. But I do want to say this note. Last night, our once 3rd grader, she's now 4th grader, she read Edward, the Extraordinary Adventures
Miraculous
of
Journey of
Edward Tulane.
Yeah.
Matt and I were hard crying as we are reading this book out loud to our kids. And it's about a rabbit who's traveling. But our 3rd grade daughter, she's like, you guys have to read this. I was reading it in class, probably after recess. And she's like, I was just crying to myself. So anyway, Matt and I were crying to a children's book last night. Jennifer, we are excited to hear more about your gospel story as we dive into how we can help equip the church to engage families who are in crisis. But let's hear some of your gospel story. This is how we ask it to every guest. If part of the gospel is, I am more sinful and flawed in myself than I ever dared believe, yet at the very same time, I'm more loved and accepted in Jesus Christ than I ever dared hope. When was that gospel first good news for you, and how is it still?
Such a great question you guys have crafted there. I really am part of a family, and I'm a family psychologist. And when I think about my faith life, it really started with my parents' faith life, who they were the first in their families to really take faith seriously and to move to a healthy lifestyle. And before that, things were just chaotic and difficult. And so they created a home that was quite remarkable in that, coming from chaos and creating peace. And I think that created the conditions for which I could learn about Jesus as a young child. That was when I first learned about Jesus. And there's nothing like family to also put you in touch with your limitations. I've been married for over 30 years to my childhood sweetheart, and we, sin against each other on a daily basis in our own special way. And it's a good life, though, as we end the day almost every day with confession of our sins and reflection on God's work in our life together, and a chance to just rely on the love of God to live life as a family.
I love that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, so speaking of families, and you, the book that you wrote or helped edit, Ministering to Families in Crisis, goes through a broad spectrum of different crises that people can go through. But when you think about all the research and everything that went in, like when a family is in crisis, what is their first step? Are they reaching out to pastors? Are they reaching out to, clinical help? Like what is the norm for families in crisis right now?
Yeah, we actually have research on that. So there is data that shows what people do when they go through crises. And they first tend to reach out to the people that are closest to them. So if they are close to their pastor and they have a relationship with their pastor, that's often the first person they'll go to. It may be family members and friends. So that's really the first circle that people go to. And then they'll move into professional roles. So clinicians, therapists, psychologists, that sort of thing, or even medical doctors sometimes are secondary or tertiary for seeking help, even though those people may have some of the keys and some specific expert knowledge base to address that, but they're first going to the people that are close to them.
You talk in your book a little bit about different responses, some of the responses that pastors have to families in crisis. Can you talk a little bit about why pastors and ministry leaders respond differently?
So one of the things about this book and about the work that I'm doing, so I'm a part of the Charis Institute at Regent University, and we work with churches broadly on addressing mental health and general crises. So we've been talking to and listening to church leaders and pastors for a while. And one of the things we find is the diversity is so wide that it just bowls you over all the time. We're just talking with someone today who's consulting with a church that's primarily Haitian church. And the group of people are like, no, we don't talk about problems. We don't talk about any issues, right? That's not okay. We're going to trust in the love of Jesus. And that's it, And so there's all the way from that to people who are pastors who are very well trained and how to address personal crises, family crises, mental health issues, all of that. They've had lots of training in that, and they consult regularly with people who are also have expertise. But what we found is the modal church, the regular church, is a great pastor who loves their congregation, and church leaders, elders who will pray with you through, the illness of your child or whatever you're going through. And they'll love on you and they'll bring you casseroles. But when some of these crises show up, they go, I don't know what to do. I'll pray for you. And then they and I'll bring you a casserole.
Right.
And now I don't know what else to do. Yeah. And we wanted to equip them with some expertise. Yeah.
Okay. So let's I love how you guys talked about triaging families. So we're gonna look at, really, we're talking to families who might be in crisis right now listening, and like, okay, what should I look for when I go and talk to my pastor? And we're talking to pastors right now who are like, okay, I've got like 75 families who are coming to me in crises. Can you, what's the triage process? What would you recommend?
Yeah, I like the triage concept too, in that it's the same as like a wartime situation, right?
Yeah.
So if you are a church leader and you have 75 families that are going through some various crises, then you have to decide where to put your resources and how to garner as much resource as possible. So if you're on the battlefield, you're going to say, hey, you who are still walking, would you please pick up this guy and take him to the medics, because I can't carry 75 people to the medics by myself, right? I have to get assistance. And so having a church community that is equipped for peer care, that is mindful for it, I think is absolutely essential for any church today, particularly in the West, but really around the world. The entire world is struggling and suffering in various ways. And so being able to say, okay, how do we care for each other beyond a good casserole? And I will not diminish the importance of a good casserole. All right. I have had them brought to me at important moments of my life, and I remember them. But it's because of the care that's behind it. And so having a pastor, having a member, how do you triage that? So you're going to who is in danger first, right? So safety first as our first issue. And we want to address safety whenever anyone's dealing with high need. But also listening. Some people come in with a lot of dramatics in the way they present and their struggles, but really listening with a good ear as to what is the problem. Is this a crisis, or is this something that they could join a regular ministry of the church and, be less lonely and have people listen to them and they will be okay, And so really being able to differentiate those things. If I'm in a family and I'm trying to triage it, I think one of the really unique things about family is thinking about where is the noise or anxiety in the family coming from? And then also who's quiet and maybe getting overlooked in the family in the midst of a crisis, so that everyone is getting attended to and is being cared for within the family unit.
So something that's popping in my head as you're talking is when I was getting my master's, just finished this last year, we took a class on the church, and a big emphasis was pastors are supposed to equip the church for the work of the ministry. Like, essentially, they're not supposed to be doing it all. Like, is it 2 Timothy, 1 Timothy, where it's like, pastors, you equip the saints to do the ministry. They're not the ministers of all things. Like, they're the shepherds. So I'm curious how you view that reality in light of usually families, they want a piece of the pastor.
Yeah. It really does take some discipleship, I think, to persuade everybody that there are other people here who can minister to you besides just your pastor.
Yeah.
We recently went through a small crisis myself. My husband had a health crisis. He was in the hospital for a few days, and our pastor had an illness in the home, and he wasn't able to come to the hospital and pray with us. So he sent a couple people to come in, and then some people voluntarily who know us from small group, at church came in. And honestly, that was even more meaningful, although I was very grateful. Our pastor called us and he cared about us and just checking in. How are things? Do you need anything? So it doesn't mean that a pastor can go, oh, good, this is for the small group leaders are going to do it all, right? Or the deacons are going to do it all, and I don't need to. I think a pastor still needs to care when there's an emergency or a crisis in the families that he ministers to, or she. But equipping that natural leader to be able to step in. And then that person is the one that's walking through, right? That's the small group leader that's there every week for the months to come, because most crises aren't done in a day or two.
Right.
Yeah. So you talk about the triage and kind of this assessment process. Like, is this someone, or is this a situation that, hey, they can get plugged into a small group, a community group, and deal with loneliness? Is it something that needs to kind of be, for lack of a better term, escalated and given to an expert? And I know in my experience, like I've had multiple times where a pastor would refer specifically an LGBTQ person from the church to me. And sometimes it feels a little bit like here, they're your problem now. Almost like I don't know what to do. And so I'm washing my hands of the situation. And why, I guess, and whether it's this situation or any situation, should a pastor not just automatically outsource, the care, but like, why should pastors just not do that immediately?
This is one of the things that I beat this drum a lot. And that is pastors have a role in a person's life that a therapist and a medical doctor and anyone else that's doing, the housekeeper doesn't have, right? The pastor has a very specific role, and that role is important to walk alongside of. Now, I understand it. I mean, how many pastors had the amount of training you have in being able to address LGBTQ issues, even theological issues? Most pastors have not had that much training, right? That just doesn't exist. So I understand the anxiety of having someone sit down and then going, their spiritual life is in the balance and I don't want to mess this up and I'm anxious about it. So let me get them to an expert. I get the anxiety of that. And at the same time, no one can be their spiritual leader, right? No one can be their spiritual mentor and caregiver in the way that their pastor or elders, whatever their church organization structure is, can be. So what I like to encourage pastors to think is yes, and, right? It's not either or, it's yes, and. Yes, someone who has LGBT concerns, someone who's suicidal, someone who's heavily depressed or anxious, whatever's going on. Yes, mental health care you would do, but also spiritual health care through that time and after, which is work because it means probably talking to you on the phone and saying, okay, what are you doing? How can I come alongside you? How can you as a therapist come alongside me as a pastor, right? Like, how can we work together for the sake of this client, your client, my parishioner, and help them through a difficult time? That's ideal.
Yeah. Well, and I can think of a few instances where that sort of thing happened, where there was someone who was, whether it was highly depressed, suicidal, anxious, something, but they were in my office, and having dealt with like abandonment, rejection wounds from their past. And the fact that a pastor or someone else from whoever was kind of helping usher them into my office really was this like present, consistent, person in their life, had probably as much therapeutic effect on their journey as like the work that we were doing in the office. And so like what you're saying, we have different roles, but man, we need the whole community is just so incredibly true.
It's so incredibly true.
You give a statistic that I found kind of surprising about divorce. Young adults, just generally, about 50% have parents who are divorced, yet young adults who are in the church, the statistic was something like 80% of those people's parents' marriages were intact. Why does that statistic matter for pastors and ministry leaders that are, working with families in crisis?
Yeah, I think one of them is it shows the vulnerabilities. Like, we're in a weird time and space. And all my understanding of the data that I've seen is that people who are attending church tend to be better educated, more stable, have more income. Like, that's who's coming to church on Sundays. So what does that mean about the people we're not reaching, or potentially even unintentionally leaving out of our communities? So when you have the single mom show up with her kids, is she getting enough support from the community of the church to be able to traverse through all of the stages of raising children? Right. If what we know is the chances that her kids are going to stay in church are a little lower, and maybe even whether they stay in the faith. So there's all kinds of probably complicated reasons for that, and as to what that is like for kids growing up. What it does mean, I think, is that marriage and family ministries are really the front lines. Now, you're speaking to a family psychologist, so I hear that, but please listen to me when I say the front lines. If you are concerned about kids leaving the faith, if you are concerned about families leaving the faith and not being in the church, right, in the community of faith, then you really need to be paying attention to the families who are struggling. Because it's that struggle that is often the first step for them to feel abandoned by the church, feel left out, feel ostracized in some way, right? Not feel like they're fully a part of everything here and an important member of the youth group, right? Are you going to be the leader of the youth group if you're the kid whose mom is on her third marriage and, and as well, things are rough? Yeah, you should be also the leader of the youth group. That's great, because you are fully a part of this community. And so I think that really should be a little bit convicting to us as a church. I know I find that convicting, but also that healthy marriages, healthy parenting, all of that is a bleeding edge frontline issue for every church. If you want to stay intact and with people in the pews, it's important for all of us.
Well, and one of the things that it said in the book is like just the notation that we are all busy. Like there's just so much busyness and you can't really help people if you don't know them. And I think the quote was like, you can't love people if you don't know them, and so that kid who's, maybe mom's on the third marriage or whatever, who may be struggling at home, if we don't take the time to get to know that kid, or that family, the mom, the family system, like we don't know how to help them. And so like, I guess a calling out to everyone, like we're all too busy. We need to slow down. But like when a pastor is maybe meeting with someone who they don't necessarily know, but as they're getting to know them, like what would be some of the signs that would help direct a pastor into like how they can help to usher this person into better community, to professional help, anything like that?
Yeah, I think there's kind of a set of questions that any pastor can ask. And I've been a part of different churches over time, and I've had that first meeting with a pastor when you first become a member or an elder, one of the leaders of the church, and they kind of ask you, what are your needs? Is there any way we can pray for you? But I think it'd be a great idea to also ask, in what ways can we shepherd you? What kinds of, not just the ministry needs we have, but what are your general needs in terms of health and mental health and personal struggle and loneliness? All of these kinds of issues, to become aware, right? To be able to know what it is going on and be okay to say, you know what? We don't have a ministry for blah, blah, blah at our church. And I'm not going to just start a new ministry today, right? Like we're not going to start a new ministry every time a need comes up. But I am going to care for you in the ways that we have, and that God has given us everything we need for everything he's asked us to do. So I'm going to care for you in the ways that we have, and I'm going to pray and be aware and see where things go in the future. And also to be open to the church at large in your larger city, right? Maybe you don't have a grief share group, for instance, if someone's going through grief, or some support group, but maybe a neighbor church does. So not being afraid of that as a church leader is bringing people on or getting to know them better, to really have that ear open to what are your needs? Where are you at? And then how can we meet those spiritual needs? And by the way, most of the time you also end up meeting some of these other needs, like you said, like abandonment issues, but then the pastor shows up and is present and cares a little in a crisis. And that meets so many needs for people.
So can I ask a follow-up? And you might not have the answer to this, but we live in a very niche, topic, so sexuality issues and everything is something that we're very familiar with. But as you were looking at the research and everything in the book, what were some of the underserved, like the under-resourced places where pastors really do have an opportunity to lean in?
So like opportunities for growth. Your area is one of them. There's definitely addressing LGBT members of families and that sort of thing. We had 2 chapters, actually. Nothing else in the book got 2 chapters, but that did. And because we really felt like there was a need there, and some really fabulous authors on those chapters. So I think there is a need for being able to address raising a family, to address sexuality, to love on people who are identifying LGBT. Q plus, and to be able to navigate that as a church. Even if it's just how do we navigate that as a church and having some conversations about it, there's a real opportunity there, I think. Yeah. I think another one that we're finding is the Gingriches wrote a chapter on trauma. And, it's somewhere around 70% of the world experiences a trauma in their lifetime. Nice. That's a lot of people. Yeah. And while many pastors and church leaders are trained in how to show up at a hospital and pray for someone, something like that, helping the church and church leaders understand what trauma is, understand trauma reactions, understand the long-term nature of experiences of trauma, that it's not just a few days after the accident or the assault or whatever, but it's for years to come. And being able to come alongside, I think there's a real opportunity there, of great need, and being able to come alongside and care for people, and then help them get, if it develops into PTSD. But most people, it doesn't develop into PTSD, and the reason is because most people have people who love them, who talk about it with them and help them process the trauma they went through, so that within a few months, they've kind of returned to normal, even though that's part of their story now. But, the church has that in spades, right? It's people who care.
I love talking to therapists with Matt in the room, and you're in the room, you're like, and it might develop into PTSD. Like, you just say it like it's like a normal thing that happens all the time. I'm like, I get it. I've walked through it myself with my own trauma, but I want to know. I love therapists. Can you share a story, Jen, of maybe a family that you've interacted with who has reached out to a church and maybe had, therapists with them as well, but like a successful, hopeful story, just so we can hear like, dude, this can work beautifully.
Yeah. So I'm pausing on purpose because, of course, the first thing that comes to mind is all the ones that didn't go well.
I know. Even that's why they reach out to you, probably.
I know. Yeah. And really, it is largely about my experience as a psychologist that practices a little more than anything.
Or a tear and repair, right? Like where it was bad and they worked through it.
Yeah. And then there's been repairs. There's been some funny ones. I'll tell you a quick funny story.
Okay.
So I'm working with a couple. I primarily do couple therapy in my practice, and I'm working with a couple for a long time, and they're really kind of stuck in a negative cycle, and we're just illuminating the cycle and trying new behaviors and exploring where it came from, all the good psychologist things. And they were Catholic. They sat down with their priest one day and explained things, and their priest was very matter of fact and basically said, "This is not right. You need to do it this way instead," and just told them how it is, very pointedly. All right. And they came back and they were like, "I think we're fine now." And, in my psychologist brain, I was like, "I don't think you're fine now. I don't think so." But I actually ran into them like a year later, like in the community. And they were like, "We're doing great. Like things are good." And I was like, "Go priest." You know what I mean? Like he just was, a little bit making me feel humble, perhaps, but maybe some of my work helped prepare the way. I don't know, but there really was an opportunity there for that collaboration. But I have seen other families, I think about a family in a church that I attended, and they were really struggling. It was interesting. The mom lived across the street from the church, and the kids were just kind of, abandoned by the dad, and it's kind of tough. So they were over in the church all the time. Like they basically became their second home. They got involved in the theater ministries in the church, as well as all the normal kid stuff. And And I just kind of watched, like, that's a long-term one, but really watching that family, they were a blessing to my family a couple of times and really ministered to my own kids. And then watching them, like, one of them is in Asia, traversing the world and teaching about Jesus. And the other one just loves God so much. Like, I just know her. She's still local. So it's really cool to see, like, when things could have gone terribly wrong. And so much of the church today can go wrong. And even honestly, that same church, a lot of things have gone wrong in that place. It's not like that. It's not that story for every family all the time. But I have seen things go very right. And the mental health needs be met and people transform their lives into something that is where they're a blessing, like they're at a point where they're able to be a blessing to other people, and move beyond recovery, essentially, into being a blessing. So I know I've seen that many times throughout many years. So even I sometimes tell the story of my husband's family too. My husband's family was in recovery when he was a little kid. And the transformation that happened, my husband will often say the best thing my parents ever did was we were in church 3 times a week. And being a part of that community was very healing. Yeah. As they also were a family that moved from chaos to care. And so very healing and just watching those things happen where it's like, oh, a community can provide healing in ways that, I can do it somewhat as a therapist and I can help illuminate and we can practice new skills and all that kind of stuff. But a whole community that holds people and gives them opportunity for growth. Yeah.
That's so good.
It's beautiful. Yeah.
So just as we are talking to just who knows, a variety of people, but I imagine that there are some pastors and ministry leaders that are hearing this conversation. What would you say to them if they want to lean in and help families in crisis and do better with that? Like, how can your book help? What would be a word for them?
Yeah. First of all, I love that people take on the ministry of caring for others within their church. And whether they are a pastor or a small group leader or, elder deacon, all those kind of roles. We really did think a lot in this book about not just the senior pastor type person, but all those other people who take on those roles. Even just a good Sunday school teacher. I don't know if you had a good Sunday school teacher growing up, but I had a couple of them and I'm like, wow, that really was a big step forward in my personal faith life because of their investment in me. So I think that those things are quiet sometimes and they're not noticed and they're time consuming. There's nothing like ministering to a family when they have a child who has schizophrenia. Right. And Steve Gresovich, who runs a really great ministry, has a chapter on mental illness. He's a psychiatrist and he has a lot to say about how a church can be thoughtful about its ministry so that people who have more severe and persistent mental illnesses can be included as much as they're able to, and to minister to the families that are around them and care for them. There is a whole little underground group of ministry people around the country who can help equip a church. So when that family walks in and you're like, I don't know what to do. This 21-year-old is seeing and hearing things that aren't there. Then there are people who can help with that in church ministry, right? Not just your local psychiatrist who can help get medications and such. And there's a great chapter we have in there on disabilities as well, which kind of relates to that. I think that's another area for a pastor to be thoughtful. Oh, someone's arriving and they have a disability of some sort. How do we include them, right? How do we make them a part of things? Not just do the curbs allow them to get a wheelchair up into the building, which sometimes doesn't happen and it's a thing, we need to make sure that people can actually get into our buildings. But also things like hearing disabilities, and not every church needs to have a deaf ministry, but some churches in a community should have a deaf ministry so that people who cannot hear can be fully a part of a community of faith. So I think that it all can feel like way too much But this concept I always have anyway is that God gives us what we need for what he's asked us to do. And so when that family shows up who has the disability, who has the anxiety, who has the suicidal teenager, that there are resources available to understand it better, to address it the best we can, and to work collaboratively with other churches and with professionals in the community. And that's a good plan. That's like, you don't need more than that. You don't need magic. You really can, like, God is enough. And this world is broken, which is probably my other thought about it, that the world is just stormy and difficult. And any good pastor knows that it's just muddy out here. And things aren't going to be great all the time. Yeah. And you're not going to be able to minister in perfect ways. And so give that up. That would be my encouragement to pastors a lot. So but that phone call you make, and if it's only 10 minutes is all you have to say, how was it in the hospital? How's your husband doing? Like my pastor did. I was so blessed by that 10 minutes. It meant so much to me, deeply, really, truly. And it didn't take a lot from him, but it just showed that he cared about me. Yeah. And that mattered so much. Yeah.
Jen, this is really helpful. I like how you just let us into that tension of world is muddy. Let's also think through what's real life. God's going to give us what we need. God is on the throne. Let's work collaboratively. You don't need to be the savior. There's one savior. So thank you for the practical pieces, for the empathy, for the stories, and for sharing your wisdom with us today.
Well, thank you so much for having me. This has been a great time.
Well, we said our official goodbye to Jennifer Ripley. Matt, you're on fire. Do you hear him?
Oh, yeah.
We need to have chats about what's going on internally with you. You're just growing right now, but I love your processing. I loved your thinking through, and you seem to be vibing what's standing out, what's remaining right now after we had that conversation.
Yeah. I mean, I think the biggest thing for me is just very tangibly having seen the importance of continued pastoral and congregational kind of care in the lives of people who are in a mental health crisis, who are going to therapy, whether it's families, individuals, couples. And I still am a firm believer that a lot of mental health issues would be curbed if the church were really the place that people could go and get connected to a good, attuned, loving community. Not that all of them would be gone, but there would be so much less. And so, the church has a powerful role to play here.
Steve, what are you chewing on still?
Well, I just, like you said, I appreciated your perspective, Matt, and your insights, and just even you can't love people you don't know, and it's a weird place to be a professional, a ministry leader or whatever, whose job is to love people. And also it's their job, and so just that tension of how to care for people, and also how, because it's your career path, and just what she said about, the importance of leaning in to young people whose families are in crisis, that could be interpreted as, oh, this is a way to grow your church, or at least to keep your church from shrinking, And so then I would imagine that the ministry leader or the pastor, their kind of job thoughts start to fire. Right. But really, if you really are loving people where they need to be loved, the growth or the lack of shrinking or whatever will take care of itself, But I just thought that's important to not just play to the A students, but also not to play to those in crisis because it's some kind of strategy, but just because we need to love people.
I love that. I liked how Jen was saying the quiet things out loud. I think about this a lot, about the tension between your work, Matt, our work in this parachurch ministry work. And then I think of churches. And I think because we are such a niche space that we are helping to equip churches. And we have had, it can feel like LGBT people in particular are getting outsourced to us. So I think about this a lot. So I loved that she was it's both and. It's, yes, use collaborative, creative care to invite other churches and people like Matt, et cetera, in these spaces. But you don't have to be everything, but you're also not nothing. You're not nothing.
Right.
So I appreciated that. And I wanted to say too, just like, I love speaking well of the church, not with blinders on my eyes, but in that same church class that I talked about, I began the class so salty about the church. I'm like, this is like a failed experiment. With every church stinks. It all has its flaws. But when you think about how it's attempting to show the world a picture of eternity, we're not in eternity yet. So it's going to be messy as we're working out how we can, as we're getting sanctified. And so that gives me more grace and patience for the church. And our kids actually love our church. I was thinking of that when she was thinking of positive examples. Gwen said this week, she's like, I want to live here. So I pray that continues. What do you guys think of the episode? Those of you who are watching, who are listening, feel free to reach out at podcast@lauriekrieg.com. We have a question of the week for next time. We want to hear on the Hold My Heart podcast Facebook group.
Can I
Yes,
interrupt?
yes.
Can we pivot on the question for next week? Can we ask people what areas of need they see that their church could maybe lean into? Or is that too serious? Are we trying to go more lighthearted?
Matt, look at you growing and changing the podcast. So where do people feel?
Yeah, like what are some ministry areas of opportunity, whether that's, I'm throwing out just client situations here, childcare for single parents who are struggling to consistently be able to go to work.
Yeah.
I mean, anything that you see as like hey, this would be a ministry need that people might be getting overlooked in.
Yeah. I mean, we can ask it. We're just going to also ask our guest next time.
Oh, that's true. So maybe we need to. You can respond to that one if you have it. But
Yeah, we
maybe
would
the
love to
question
hear
of the
it.
week stays
I would
the
love
same.
to hear it at podcast@lauriekrieg.com. We'd love to hear where are you seeing the need, and maybe we do that as part of our Q&A at one point. Is like, okay, here's what people are saying the need is, and then we just toss it around with the three of us. So yeah, yes, and Matt, I love it. Let's do it.
Yeah.
All right, but our silly question of the week that we're going to ask our guest next time is, who is doing it? There's a movie, like a horror movie, I think, coming out about Holland, Michigan, which is like, did you see the ad for that?
I only know that Nicole Kidman is in
Nicole
it.
Kidman.
And I'm like, oh, she definitely fits as a Hollander, even though she's Australian, but like she has the look.
She has the look.
Yeah.
Okay. Holland, Michigan, there's like Dutch dancing and tulip time, and I lived there for 3 years, and I'm definitely Dutch, and I've gone to tulip time. Do you have in your small town or a small town that you know and love, what weird tradition do they have? Do they have Dutch dancing / murder with Nicole Kidman?
I was just in Chicago, and they were about to start Pulaski Days. That's a big thing.
Yeah.
There.
Eat
What are
giant
Pulaski's?
donuts, right?
Pulaski is some person, I think.
I thought it was always
thinking
donut.
But I don't know.
Punchkis.
That's punchkis. That's what you're
are
thinking of.
donuts.
Are they
and
related? I thought these were related.
I have no idea, but that was yesterday. Was Punchki Day
As we
It's Fat
record.
Tuesday.
As we
Yes,
record,
yes.
this weeks later.
Oh, that's true. Yep.
All right, what's your weird tradition? Dutch dancing and murder, punchkis and Pulaskis. Anyway, let us know. Thanks so much to WCSG for not kicking us out yet, even though we talk about ridiculous things sometimes. Thank you so much to the Zach of all trades, to Hunter for doing the video and audio. Thank you for joining us, and for all of us here at the Hold My Heart podcast. We will see you next time.